This is part of our ongoing experiment and attempt to continue engagement as we're all socially isolating to still stay connected with one another. And I'm really glad to be here with you. A few things before we really begin with this talk. One is I just want to say that our marketing director, Julie Lockhart, is here with me. She'll be keeping an eye on comments and questions. So if you have any, please do put those there and she'll let me know. Julie, say hi.
Hi.
Excellent. And I said this before, for those who don't know, Julie is also my wife. So this is all allowed. We are quarantined together. And so I just want to dive right in and say, our talk for this week is about the way in which we use multiple disciplines in our work, dance, music, other ways of engaging, and how they show up and how they evolve through our process. And for those who were with us in previous weeks, we talked about, one, our development process and how we develop work, which I'll just recap briefly, which is that we have script development meetings where everyone joins together and creates the script together through a process of discussion and learning, followed by and incorporated with physical development, where we're on our feet experimenting with things. And then we go into a more focused development process that lasts 3 to 4 weeks, where we're really trying out stuff in the play. And then we move into a rehearsal period. So I just wanted to recap that for you. And, every theater dybbuk piece uses usually live and usually original composed music, uses choreographed movement or dance, and often also uses other forms that are stylized, such as puppetry or mask. And first, let's discuss why, the philosophy behind it. Because sometimes people have asked us, why is it so important that all your pieces all your works include these different elements? And I think that one of the powers of different disciplines is that they all speak to people in different ways. They hit different parts of our mind and our heart. They engage us cognitively, intellectually, emotionally in different ways. And by bringing them all together in a single work, we kind of multiply the impact. And we really get to speak to all the parts of ourselves at once. And so that's why philosophically we do multidisciplinary work. And if there's any multidisciplinary artists on this thread, would love to hear your thoughts. Before I continue talking, comments or questions of any kind are welcome. If you want to know about process, about subject matter, if you have thoughts about why you work the way you do, please feel free to chime in and I'll address them as I can. So let me take you through some of the ways in which multidisciplinary work in different disciplines has been used in our pieces and how it's evolved through the process. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. Our first show was a piece called Cave, a Dance for Lilith. And it actually used Hebrew goddess mythology and Lilith folklore. Lilith, according to some stories, was the first woman before Eve. Used those stories as a way of looking at our society and questions of conflict and making somebody the other. And we started our company by saying we want to be doing work in different disciplines. So we collaborated and co-produced the show with LA Contemporary Dance Company. And the thing that was fascinating about working with the dance company, and this is how process works, when I started, I thought that I'd be asking the question of how does the dance use the script? In other words, I'm writing a play, and how does the dance respond to the play? And what I learned in working with the choreographer, Kate Hutter, and the company and the dancers was it actually worked the other way. I started asking, how does the script use the dance and interact with the dance? And what that meant was that Cave wound up having a lot of language that was rhythmic or repeating, where it was visceral rather than just solely intellectual or psychological. Because I learned from dance that sometimes the language had to act as score, as something for which the dance could bounce off of and intersect with. And so that's an example where the fact that we had a year-long process developing the show let the script change and evolve and be in true response to the techniques being offered to me and with which the company could interact. So that's one example. Again, any questions, comments, feel free to chime in. I'm happy to answer. I want to jump ahead about 2 years from there. So that was 2012. We did a show in 2014 called Tefillah, and for those who speak Hebrew, Tefillah is prayer, And it was actually Theater Dybbuk's exploration of the Jewish prayer service and the structure of the Jewish prayer service. And we used that structure to look at questions about humanity and human history, as well as, specific Jewish history. And I'll discuss with you how the use of music evolved in that piece. We began knowing that we likely wanted to use, in this case, less original composed for the work music and more of existing liturgical music, because if we're dealing with prayer and in that setting. And we also did know that we wanted the live component to be a cantor who wound up being a gentleman named Seth Ettinger, who was great, who would kind of function almost like clergy in the piece, would be sharing that liturgy throughout. However, we thought, well, this is a theater piece, so clearly we are going to abstract it, and we actually did recording sessions with different cantors and different voices and thought we were going to have all this recorded music to support that live music. And as the piece evolved, we discovered that we were going to do a tour of sacred spaces throughout Los Angeles, where we were actually bringing the show to synagogues and churches and using those spaces in new ways. And as we were about 2 weeks from opening and in the rehearsal process, we found that because we're in these sacred spaces, it felt odd to suddenly have all this recorded, abstracted music that was adding on to the experience. And this piece required a kind of purity, a kind of just that cantor's voice and just the live voices in the room. And so we wound up doing all this work and doing all this recording and eliminating 75 to 80% of it. And the piece was stronger for it, because then that single voice carried us through the piece as we went through these different landscapes. So that's another example of how important that discipline was and also how it changed through the process. One of my favorite stories of evolution of work with different disciplines, our 2018 show Lost Tribes, and I discussed it last week, but I'll bring it up again. Lost Tribes was interested in looking at race and identity in America and those pieces of ourselves that are maybe lost to us. And it used the Lost Tribes of Israel, which is a narrative about, those tribes of Israel that were lost to history in the 7th, 8th century. And there's different debates about where they are. Do they still exist? Do they not? Use that as a way of looking at race and identity and the hidden pieces of ourselves. And we knew that obviously there would be choreographed dance movement, because that's what we do. And in our physical development meetings with Kai Hazelwood, who was the choreographer on that piece, and Leslie Gray, who was the production designer, is also a puppeteer, we were working a lot with fabric. We thought, what would happen if we had fabric that was kind of binding us all together? Because this idea of tribal identity, so we're bound by things. So the actors would be working together in our physical development, trying to figure out how they navigate being bound by fabric. And sometimes we even made little puppet people out of the fabric to discover how it might transform. So we did all this work and discovered some really interesting things, that we loved the idea of being bound together and being tied and trying to figure out how to navigate that. And then one day I was sitting in a coffee shop with Leslie and Kai, and I don't remember who said it first, but one of them said, fabric on a practical level has some challenges, the amount of control you have over it. And also on a metaphoric level, what is it saying? It's sort of flowy. What if we use rope? And what if rope is the thing that binds us? Because rope, one is it is so identified with the ties that bind, but it also has this constricting aspect. We often view rope as something that can be knotted up and hold people back. So it has this tension in it. And I thought that was great. So we started using rope. And then one day Kai came to me and she said, I have this idea. What if half the vocabulary in the piece is people untying and tying rope constantly? So that no matter what is going on intellectually and psychologically between them, what the story we're watching of the people is them trying to stay connected and not being able to, and trying to figure out how to get reconnected. So throughout about 3/4 of Lost Tribes, people were tying and untying rope. And I remember a remarkable moment where an audience member who English wasn't his first language came up to me and said afterward, it was a remarkable experience because the language was so dense and I couldn't catch it all, but I could follow the emotional story. I knew what was going on because I could see these people struggling with trying to stay tied together. And I thought, that's it. That's it. That's why we do this multidisciplinary work, because it's operating on so many levels. And if you get one thing, but you don't get another, you're still getting something that is touching you. So that's one of my favorite tales of how things evolved. Any questions, comments, Julie?
No, people just happy to see you.
Okay, good to see everyone. Um, so I'm going to jump ahead even more to our 2019 show, the one that happened just this past year, which was called Hell Prepared. And for those who were there, you may recall it was a ritual exorcism from a kind of Jewish perspective that actually went on a descent into hell, or Gehenna, a Jewish hellish space. And so the piece itself sort of took this journey through time and space into kind of an underworld. And so early on, Leslie Gray, who I mentioned earlier, who's a puppeteer and works with us as a production designer, said to me, what if we explore shadow in our physical development when we're on our feet? Because if we're talking about hell and we're talking about darkness, shadow seems like a natural place to go. So we started doing all this shadow puppetry in our physical development. And when I say shadow puppetry, I mean sometimes it was people in shadow using their bodies, sometimes it was bringing in other elements, figuring out how to use elements in shadow to create story and landscape. And we were also fortunate that we had a cast, Julie Lockhart and Diana Tanaka and Jonathan Williams, who also had experience in puppet work. So we could really work quickly together to figure things out. And so we didn't yet know how we were going to use this discipline, but we knew it said something emotionally about the journey into an unknown underworld space. And then Leslie had a brainstorm one day. She turned to me, we were having a production meeting, and she said, what if we surround the audience in curtains so that we can do shadow all around them as we go through this descent into hell? And I thought, what a great idea, not yet knowing how we're going to get enough equipment and people into those places, but this is how that happens. I thought, well, that is fundamentally a vocabulary for the piece. And so that's what we did. We built this whole structure of fabric around the audience and surrounded the audience. But what we also discovered was that shadow puppetry, in the sense of bringing in other elements, wound up not being right. We wanted the piece to feel like it was coming out of the moment, the people there and whatever they had on their bodies and nothing more. So it transformed to, instead of being puppetry exactly, it was more like shadow movement, where people were behind the screens doing movement throughout the piece. And so that's where then choreography comes in, where really what they were doing was dance or improvised movement with structure that Kai kind of led. And then Leslie would say, if you move the light here or move it back, that's going to have a different effect. So with her expertise in that area, so it was this collaboration. And then on top of that, this is where all the disciplines come in. The composer on the work, Fahed Siadat, we had a wonderful group of 6 singers who their role in the piece was to be the community, kind of singing the song, the rhythm of the community. And we realized, they need to transform from being members of the community to being the people in hell. So they wound up going behind the curtains and performing the choreography. And then the music that was written wound up being really the score for that choreography and helped us to understand the journey through the hellish space. So you see how all these things were working together. Julie, anything?
No, you're getting a lot of compliments on your beard.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I mean, one of the benefits of this isolation is that I've stopped shaving. I am glad to hear it is being appreciated. That's a joy. We'll see. I'm thinking like a little ZZ Top. We'll see how it goes over the next few months. So thank you. The other thing I want to point out, because I've been talking about these other disciplines, is that because of our work is very dense intellectually, that I think what this also does is it gives people an entry point who might be struggling with how much dialogue there is and how much intellectual content. It lets them know that it is also communicating on a really basic emotional level, because what song and dance and other elements often do is they hit on that viscera. They can hit on those places where words don't suffice. So that's also part of the reason we recognize we are asking a lot of the audience intellectually, and so we're giving them other things to process that tell them what else is going on and open up portals for them to engage in a variety of ways. So I'll offer one other thought about kind of philosophically why we do this. You know, if theater is ritual, if we think about, you know, the ancient purpose of theater, or one of the purposes, is for people to gather together in community and transcend self in community by witnessing something about their own humanity. And if we think about ritual, it often is multidisciplinary. It often does sometimes incorporate words, right? It also incorporates song quite often, and it incorporates some kind of body experience. And it's because I think those designers of ritual understand that we are whole people, and in order to transcend self, we have to engage with all of self. And so I think that that's why Theater Dybbuk's work is attempting to do that. It is using the tools and principles of ritual to help a community, an audience, see itself, understand itself, and go beyond itself for the sake of the greater good. Last thing I'll offer, and if there are any questions, great. Anything coming up other than the nice beard comments?
No, I think there's some curiosity as to if you stopped shaving entirely, or if it's just your beard. The beard is very popular today.
Thank you. The other things, it's private. If you contact me offline. Oh, no. The hair is still being shaved. I'm that's been more than 20 years, so I'm committed. So the last thing I'll offer is our next work, which I've talked about in previous weeks, which is Breaking Protocols, which is based on, I shouldn't even say based on, it's actually exploring, investigating, exploding the notorious anti-Semitic fraudulent text, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. We are going to be treating it as a vaudeville, using the tools of vaudeville performance to kind of explore this absurdity. And the beautiful thing about vaudeville is it's really multidisciplinary. There is song, dance, spoken word, all of those things at once. And so we're figuring out in this process how to use those tools of vaudeville to unpack the things that are going on in the protocol's history. So, for example, I was actually saying to some colleagues the other day that right now we're working on a portion of the performance that may deal with the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. Sorry to bring that up at this moment. For those who don't know, that there were times in Europe where during the Black Plague, Jews were blamed because it was said that Jews were poisoning the wells. There was all this stuff going on of accusations. And of course, this has to do with the human need to blame the other, right? And find a reason to something that seems unreasonable. Also, there's debate about this historically, that the Jews were staying healthier than the general population, which may have had to do with washing rituals and the relative isolation compared to other integrated groups. So I thought, well, what vaudeville form can speak to this moment? And I thought, magic. So we're writing the Black Death, Black Plague sequence as a magic act where people disappear. And so again, we're using this discipline to tell an emotional story about something going away and people not understanding how it happens. It's magic. And then having to find reason, having to explain it. So again, that's how this use of different forms can have a conversation underneath the conversation. Great.
Leslie Jeweler had a comment.
Yeah.
She mentioned that a great teacher, Harry Master George, said that the reason there is music in the theater is that the emotion is so big it cannot just be expressed by speaking.
Great. Thank you. So this comment from Leslie, Harry Master George, who is an acting teacher, mentioned that music is important in the theater because it expresses that which can't be spoken. And transcends it and is larger than it. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think that one of the things, and it's funny because people often think of our work as very experimental and avant-garde, but one of the things I will say is I grew up doing musicals. I did 30, 40 musicals during the time I grew up. And what I learned from that form was this, exactly what Leslie is saying, that music has the power that whatever is going on in the moment to bring what is happening inside bursting forth. And I can't say this to you, but I can sing it, because the thing about music is words are contained in one way and music can break that container. So I actually learned from musicals, I really do think I did, the way in which that these forms can actually help us to get to larger truths about what we feel and also what the structures around us feel and are experiencing. So thank you, Leslie, for that, that comment. I think it's really true. And it was good to actually acknowledge and remember that this very kind of, American form that a lot of people know really inspired this view of how these disciplines work. So thank you so much. It was lovely to spend another 15, 20 minutes with you. even when this ends, the comments are always available to you to ask questions, and we'll do our best to respond. A couple things to know coming up. One is we are going to be continuing this series. We've made a decision that every Friday at this time will either be me offering a talk as the artistic director, or we're currently working on possibly some mini trainings with some of our artists and collaborators so that the public, can get to experience some of our techniques and possibly even kind of train with us in the sense that you can follow along with what our trainers do with and our own artists do with us internally. So more on that to come. Feel free to go to our website, theaterdybbuk.org, or this Facebook page for updates. And thank you so much. I hope you're all staying as healthy as possible, as sane as possible, as safe as possible, and looking forward to seeing you next week. Take care.